Lumos. Prisoner of Azkaban is probably one of my favorite movies. There's so much to it. The artistry of the movie changed so much between Chamber of Secrets and Prisoner of Azkaban. I also am a sucker for time travel movies, but I think a lot of people will always say Prisoner of Azkaban is probably their favorite of all 7 Harry Potter installments, with Half-Blood Prince probably being a close second. It's the universal lore of learning about the Marauders or learning about Voldemort that makes those 2 books the best. But today we are talking about Prisoner of Azkaban. I have 28 fun facts for you. Well, 27. One of them's fake, but only the truest of Harry Potter nerds will probably know the fake one. So, without further ado, let's get started and see what all you know and don't know about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. So let's start with fun fact number 1. Did you know that Buckbeak was actually the first character to do something unspeakable on camera in history? It's not really unspeakable. Buckbeak was actually the first CGI creature. Actually, I think the first CGI anything to poop on screen. Animators actually animated Buckbeak to poop on screen to make it seem more realistic. Because if you just had a horse bird sitting in the back, that's no fun. But if you have it poop, not only does it make little kids laugh, but then you're like, wait, is it real? It's not. It's all an illusion. But that's what's so great about this series, is they look into the tiniest details to try to make it seem more realistic. Did you know Buckbeak was not the only animal on set to relieve itself? In reality, Scabbers, the rat, actually kept peeing on Ron's hand in the scenes that he was holding him, which, unfortunately, it wasn't a CGI rat. It was a real rat, so Rupert Grint had to deal with rat pee covered hands. No wonder Hermione didn't want to hug him in the last movie, but it's just a kind of a funny fun fact. That's why it's called a fun fact, guys. But Rupert Grint was a trooper and continued to act even as the pee dribbled on his hand. So after the second movie, the director, Chris Columbus, decided this project was going to take too much of his life, and he really wanted to spend time with his daughter. You probably would have seen her. She's Susan Bones. So she didn't have any speaking lines, but he wanted to spend more time not only with his daughter, but his other children and his wife. So he decided to step down as director. Well, they needed to find a new director, and that director was Alfonso Cuarón. He was hesitant at first because he didn't want to have to deal with children or child actors. He was like, I don't know if I can get what I want out of them. I don't think this movie will do what I want, because he had never read the books before. But he got a call from his friend Guillermo del Toro, who called him up and said, dude, take this. It'll be great. You can bring so much to this role. And that's what he did. He followed in the footsteps of Chris Columbus, who, with the second movie, started to make the movie a little bit darker. This movie, he set the standard that would then follow with the rest of the directors who take over. He wanted to make it a darker movie. He wanted to make it seem like a mystery, which is what the series is. When Alfonso Cuarón came onto the set, he wanted to see who these characters were, because like I said in the last fun fact, he wasn't sure if he wanted to work on this movie because he wasn't sure about children actors. So he had the 3 main stars write a paper. Just write a paper about who your character is. Emma Watson, as Hermione, wrote a huge, detailed paper about who Hermione Granger was and how it affected her. Harry, he did about a page, 2 pages. I like Harry Potter because he looks like me. Good job, Daniel Radcliffe. And then Rupert Grint didn't even do the paper. Never turned it in. Just completely blew it off. Probably even tried to see if he could copy Daniel's work, because that's what Ron would do. And honestly, it sums up their character. They knew their character. Ron would have never turned in that paper, and if he did, he would have copied Harry. Harry would have done enough to get by, and Hermione, of course, would have gone above and beyond and wrote a 10-page dissertation about why Hermione is important as a role for women. With Alfonso Cuarón being as artistic as he is, he wanted to bring a more scenic adventure to the series. So when they first started filming, they actually ended up going to Scotland and living there for a couple weeks to try to get as many shots of the scenic Scotland to bring the movie into a more realistic area on the coast side of it. And just, we see more of the exterior of Hogwarts in this than we've seen in the first two movies combined. We get a more visual layout of Hogwarts because of the art style that the director wanted. Talking about art imitating life, we get to the Dementors. The Dementors are probably one of the scariest creatures in the Harry Potter universe, at least in the UK. The hide behind in America kind of freaks me out a little bit. But the Dementors are the manifestation of the author's depression. And it really kind of works. Like, it's not just the author's depression, it was just the experience that the author had with depression. And of course, most people relate to how the Dementors make you feel and depression. But apparently the cure for that is just chocolate and maybe a good therapist. But art imitates life in the fact that the Dementors are just a manifestation of depression, which makes them so much darker. Harry Melling, who played Dudley Dursley, was almost recast in the third movie because when he hit puberty, he had a glow up. He wasn't the chubby, piggy little boy that he was in the first movie or even the second movie. He lost a ton of weight. Good for him. If you've seen pictures of him now, he had a glow up like Matthew Lewis did. But he almost had to be recast because he lost so much weight. But in the end, they decided to allow him to wear a fat suit and prosthetics to keep him in the movie, at least for Prisoner. Designing CGI animals is probably one of the more difficult things, especially when they're mythical, because you've got to figure out how they move. And for Buckbeak, it was kind of a difficult thing to figure out because they weren't sure how they wanted to capture his movements. He's half bird, half horse, but how does he move? Does he move a little bit more skittishly like a bird does, like a little bit hoppy? Or does he walk majestically like a horse? Well, originally, when they started doing it, he was going to be more puppy-like, which I'm not sure how that would have worked with a giant eagle horse creature. I guess it would have been a lot like Toothless and How to Train Your Dragon, but luckily this didn't happen because I think it would have not worked very well. I think the more majestic walking style, more like a horse, is a little bit more intimidating and makes him seem more mythical than if he acted like a puppy. There are scenes in the third movie that the author stated gave her chills because they foreshadowed things that were yet to come. She never explicitly says what those things are, and there are a lot of speculation on what moments may or may not be the foreshadowing that were unintentionally pulled from the books or added into the movie that weren't even in the books, that weren't even known about until she had written them into the next books. Because when the third movie came out, they were only on the fifth book. But unfortunately, we do not know what those moments are, but I would love to have a discussion on what we think they might be. So leave a comment down below on what you think those moments that foreshadowed future events that were not in the books are. So Mina Lima, the group that made all of the props in the Harry Potter movies, they liked to add super detailed messages. One of the things that really stands out is Sirius Black's poster. Has a bunch of random letters of script, some sort of other language, runes, things like that, but they've been translated. And the main rune that is on the poster translates to more or less human, which kind of puts a dark commentary on the Harry Potter series as a whole, especially with recent events that we won't talk about, but just how the wizards as a whole treat people and creatures, more or less human. They're not important because they're not us, is almost what it says. He is a monster, not a human. You know the triple-decker purple bus that's able to weave in and out of traffic and drive very, very fast? Well, it actually didn't drive that fast. They actually had to film it in slow-mo and then speed it up so they could make it look like it was going super fast. And then you're probably wondering, why did they have to film it in slow-mo? The night bus had to drive super slow because it was so tall. It was so tall that they had to load the bottom floor full of rocks during filming to make sure that it wouldn't flip over, whether it be from wind or just a turn, because it was so tall, it was very top heavy. So they had to put 4 tons of weight at the bottom of the night bus to make sure that it did not flip over. You know Sirius Black, the father figure that Harry didn't really get to connect with fully. Well, not only was Sirius Black Harry's mentor, but the actor who played Sirius Black, Gary Oldman, was Daniel Radcliffe's mentor. Daniel Radcliffe idolized Gary Oldman as an actor, was looking forward to being able to act alongside Gary Oldman. He was so excited. But not only did they get to work together as mentor-mentee in the movie, but on set, when they weren't filming, Gary Oldman was also teaching Daniel Radcliffe how to play bass guitar, which I feel like if Sirius was a muggle, he would also teach Harry how to play bass guitar, which is pretty cool. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Harry never cast a spell. In Prisoner of Azkaban, we never actually see Azkaban, ever. It is brought up so many times, but we never get to see it, ever, which is quite unfortunate. The first time we actually get to see inside of Azkaban, Hogwarts Legacy. We hear about it, we hear how horrible it is, but we don't get to see the inside until Hogwarts Legacy. Maybe in some flashbacks, whether it be in the 3rd or the 4th season of the Harry Potter reboot series, maybe we'll see inside of Azkaban from Sirius' point of view or Barty Crouch Jr.'s. But in the Prisoner of Azkaban movie, we do not see Azkaban. Although Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them was not even thought about as a movie concept back when Prisoner of Azkaban came out, there was a small Easter egg that was placed on the Marauders map when shown to Harry from Fred and George, with Newt Scamander walking through the halls. It may have been an unintentional Easter egg of just, hey, let's pick names that we've heard in the series. Newt Scamander's one of them. Let's put it in there. Nobody's going to question it. What kind of people do you think we are? Of course we're going to question it. Why is Newt Scamander at Hogwarts? Maybe to have a conversation about how to get Buckbeak off from being tried. Or what can we do to control these Dementors? Who knows? What we do know now is that Newt Scamander and Albus Dumbledore were close friends. But it's a fun little Easter egg that's hidden in there. Blink and you'll miss it moment. Professor R.J. Lupin, who was endearingly played by David Thewlis, was not originally going to be played by David Thewlis. Originally, David Thewlis tried out for Professor Quirrell. Well, I'm glad he didn't get it because I think he brought so much life to the Professor Lupin role. And when I read the books, he is who I picture. Hopefully, whoever they cast as Professor Lupin in the reboot series will be able to fill such big shoes. So one of the major plot points in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is Harry's broom is destroyed. The Nimbus 2000 is destroyed. We do see that in the movie. But part of the plot line is Harry needs a new broom, and he gets it. But in the book, he gets it for Christmas. In the movie, he gets it in the final scene. It's a drastic difference, but I think there was so much that had to be fit within the movie that they cut that storyline, but they needed to explain his new broom because it is so important to the next movie that he has a broom, specifically a firebolt. One of everybody's favorite moments in the Harry Potter and Prisoner of Azkaban is when Emma Watson punches Draco Malfoy right square in the nose. It was such a big moment that in the premiere, everybody stood up and cheered. But it wasn't always supposed to be a punch. Those who have read the book will know it was a slap that was supposed to happen. But Emma Watson thought it would be better if she just punched him. But one thing that we all know is I'm sure Lucius Malfoy probably heard about it. Or maybe he didn't, because I'm pretty sure Lucius would have been like, excuse me, you let a mudblood not only touch you, but hit you? You disgust me. So you know the scene where the Dementors come in and they're about to take the soul from both Sirius and Harry? Well, you know how Harry starts to pass out? That was actually real. That moment was so timing heavy and intense that Daniel Radcliffe wasn't breathing the way he needed to breathe and ended up hyperventilating and almost passing out. Not acting like he was passing out, but kind of captures the realism of the stress that he was feeling in the moment of, oh, these Dementors are attacking me. So I think it kind of works. I don't know how much of that they left in the final scene, but they've kept other things in different movies that were the actor in actual peril or pain that they kept because it was so good for film. Looking at you, Lord of the Rings fans, we all know that when he kicked the helmet, he broke his foot and then hiked to the next site of filming. You don't have to tell us every time we watch the movie. And talking about commitment to the art of film, David Thewlis, when becoming the werewolf Lupin, had to sit in makeup for 6 whole hours to be put in the prosthetics to make him a werewolf. Multiple days. 6 hours. That's rough. But it paid off. So when you watch that scene, it wasn't just all CGI. There were some practical effects for the transformation. The full werewolf, yes, that's CGI. But the transformation took hours to do. Appreciate it. Life on set of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban was not just serious, dark, scary moments. There were some lighthearted moments. Michael Gambon, who did replace Richard Harris after his tragic passing before filming started of Prisoner of Azkaban, was good with working with kids. Well, it got around that Daniel Radcliffe had a crush on one of the extras that was playing in the scene where they're all in the Great Hall together. So he asked if he could have his sleeping bag near her, so I guess in between scenes, he could talk to her. Michael Gambon got word of that and slipped a fart machine in the sleeping bag that he was laying in. And while presenting his lines with Alan Rickman, would occasionally just push the fart buttons to make fart noises come out of Daniel Radcliffe's sleeping bag. There's a deleted scene that is in special features for the movie, so if you're able to get a hold of that, go and watch it. It's hilarious. I think it's also on this platform. But the entire time that he's pushing this button, he's giving his speech and isn't breaking. Neither is Alan Rickman, which is a testament to their professionality. But everybody else is losing their crap, especially Harry, since he's got the fart machine. But it's good to see that they were having fun on set. Not only did Harry Melling have a grow up in between Chamber of Secrets and Prisoner of Azkaban, but so did Matthew Lewis. Matthew Lewis finally grew into his teeth and started to thin out. He couldn't have been the round-faced boy, Neville Longbottom, with the bad teeth. His teeth starting to fit his mouth, so he ended up having to wear fake teeth and also wore a couple of prosthetics. As the movie went on, he had to continue to wear that until finally in Deathly Hallows, he was able to lose all that and become the hero that he's meant to be. But that's the problem with starring child actors, is sometimes they don't grow up to what you expect them to be. Sometimes they grow up to be stone cold hotties. So we already talked about Richard Harris's passing and how Michael Gambon took over. But there was a point in between Richard Harris and Michael Gambon that Ian McKellen almost became the next Dumbledore. Ian McKellen was originally asked to become Dumbledore before Richard Harris was, but turned it down because he was busy filming Fellowship of the Rings and Two Towers, because that was around the time they were all filmed back to back. More Lord of the Rings fun facts. But by the time Prisoner of Azkaban came around, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King had finished filming. So Ian McKellen was done filming Lord of the Rings and was able, if he wanted to become Dumbledore. But he turned it down for 2 reasons. Number 1, he said, I've already played an old white-bearded wizard. I don't need to be another one. But the other reason he turned it down was because at one point Richard Harris had insulted his acting. So he didn't feel that it was prudent for him to take over his role because Richard Harris would not have approved, which is fine. I think it would have been very confusing. So is that Gandalf or is that Dumbledore? No, it's both. He's both. Talking about certain people replacing other people, we talked about Chris Columbus having stepped down after the second movie and someone else had to take place as director. Well, Gilderoy Lockhart himself almost became the director for Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. He lost his memory and decided to become a Muggle director. No, Kenneth Branagh, who has done a lot of directing, such as all of the Agatha Christie, Death on the Nile, Haunting in Venice, Murder on the Orient Express. He directed as well as starred in those movies, and he also did the original Thor movie in Phase 1 of the MCU. But he almost took the job to become the director of Prisoner of Azkaban, but turned it down because he wanted to do different projects. So you know that scene where Sirius comes out and drags Ron into the Whomping Willow? Well, Rupert Grint was wearing a harness and wasn't being dragged by a dog, but of course. But he was being dragged by a stuntman acting like a dog, pulling him with the harness, which is just kind of funny. So next time you watch that scene where he's getting pulled by Sirius Black, just picture him being pulled by a man, which in reality, he actually was being pulled by a man. Talk about realism. So while we're on the topic of the Whomping Willow, the Whomping Willow was completely CGI and motorized robotic arms. But originally, it was going to just be a puppet. Miniature puppet that they just, woo, like that. But they couldn't capture the proper movements, so then they eventually used more robotic arms and a lot of CGI to make it look more realistic in the end. So, the title, Prisoner of Azkaban. The prison of Azkaban. Talking about Azkaban. The word Azkaban is actually a derivation and combination of the words Alcatraz and Abaddon. Alcatraz being one of the most notorious prisons in America that was almost inescapable. I think in history there was only one group of people who was able to escape, and they're not even sure if they survived. But it was a prison on an island surrounded by rough waters, like Azkaban. Abaddon is an area in hell where people are tortured. If you watch Supernatural, Abaddon is also one of like the worst demons. But it's an area in hell where people are tortured. So Azkaban, an island surrounded by rough waters with a prison on it, tortured by demons. Dementors, Azkaban, Alcatraz, Abaddon, Azkaban. All fits together. A nice puzzle. So just the worst things of the worst all become Azkaban. We've talked about Buckbeak twice, but we're going to circle back to the original scene of Buckbeak. Because originally, Buckbeak was being filmed as a horse. I know the idea of how Buckbeak was going to be animated was that it was going to be animated like a puppy, but they scrapped that idea and brought in a horse. They were going to use the horse and just CGI over the horse feathers. But unfortunately, the horse was not very cooperative, so eventually, after like a scene of using the horse, they ended up just switching it to a stick, which was more cooperative, and then fully CGI'd the hippogriff. So that is all 28. Are you as tired as I am? Because that was a lot of fun facts. Do you know which one was fake? Honestly, I don't remember which one is fake. I do, but let me know in the comments which one was the fake one. Unfortunately, there's no prize, but I will give your house 10 points if you can guess which fun fact is fake. So just leave it in the comments, and I will comment how many points your house gets if you get it right. So without further ado, we will see you in the next video. And as always, stay marvelous. Nox.